The cruelest lies are often the ones an entire kingdom chooses to believe. The rumor spread across the northern kingdom faster than the winter wind racing through the evergreen forests. By sunrise, merchants repeated it in crowded marketplaces. By noon, traveling merchants carried it across distant villages. Before the royal bells echoed through the capital that evening, nearly everyone believed the same story. The Alpha King had ordered himself an ugly wife. Some laughed openly. Others whispered behind respectful smiles. A few claimed they had heard even worse things about the young woman chosen for the royal marriage, although none of them had ever seen her with their own eyes. Inside Blackthorn Citadel, where ancient stone towers overlooked endless mountains beneath a grey northern sky, those whispers slipped quietly through every corridor until they reached the royal council chamber itself. King Cale Ashford stood before a massive oak table carved with the history of the Northern Kingdom, his black ceremonial cloak resting heavily across broad shoulders as maps and treaty documents lay neatly arranged before him. At 31 years old, he had become known as a ruler whose decisions were guided by reason rather than emotion. Peace mattered more to him than pride, and the stability of the kingdom always outweighed his personal wishes. The marriage agreement waiting before him was another duty to accept, not a dream to celebrate. Lord Cedric, his trusted royal advisor, carefully broke the silence. "Your Majesty, the nobles have already begun talking." Cale lifted his eyes from the parchment. "They always do." Cedric hesitated before continuing. "They say Lady Evelyn Hart is unfortunate in appearance. Some believe House Hart deliberately concealed the truth until the treaty could no longer be refused." Several council members exchanged uneasy glances, waiting to see whether their king would reconsider the arrangement. Instead, Cale calmly reached for the royal seal. His expression never changed. Peace built upon honor is worth more than beauty praised by strangers. The heavy seal pressed firmly into warm crimson wax, making the marriage decree official. No celebration followed. No music filled the chamber. Only the quiet certainty that the future of the kingdom had taken a path from which there would be no return. Beyond the castle walls, however, the decree became something entirely different. The truth disappeared beneath endless speculation. Noble families joked that the Alpha King would soon regret his decision. Wealthy merchants exaggerated stories they had never witnessed. Travelers invented details simply because every audience welcomed another scandal. By sunset, Lady Evelyn Hart had become a legend shaped entirely by gossip instead of reality. Yet hundreds of miles away, in the peaceful countryside where House Hart overlooked gentle hills and quiet forests, Evelyn folded her final dress with careful hands before placing it inside a weathered traveling chest. She had heard the rumors long before everyone else. She knew exactly what strangers believed about her. Still, no bitterness appeared on her gentle face. She thanked every servant preparing the journey, paused to comfort a frightened stable boy worried about the long road ahead, and quietly admired the familiar view outside her bedroom window one last time. She did not ask whether the king wanted this marriage. She did not wonder whether the court would welcome her. Some questions, she believed, could only be answered by living through them. As darkness settled over both distant homes, two completely different lives moved toward the same destiny. One carried expectations built upon responsibility. The other carried dignity untouched by rumor. Neither realized that when the carriage finally reached Blackthorn Citadel, it would not only change their futures. It would expose how easily an entire kingdom could mistake prejudice for truth. The first light of dawn stretched across the rolling hills surrounding House Hart as the royal carriage waited quietly before the manor, its polished black frame reflecting the pale colors of the morning sky. A team of magnificent white horses stood patiently while servants loaded the final traveling chests, speaking in hushed voices as though louder words might disturb the fragile peace of the moment. Evelyn Hart stepped through the front door wearing a simple ivory traveling dress beneath her charcoal cloak, carrying herself with the same quiet grace that had guided her through every rumor spoken about her. She paused only once, looking back at the home where she had spent every season of her life. There was sadness in her eyes, but no regret. She knew that some journeys could never be avoided, and she had chosen long ago that fear would never decide the direction of her future. As the carriage began rolling northward, villages slowly appeared along the winding road. Farmers paused beside wooden fences. Shopkeepers leaned against open windows. Children pointed curiously before being gently pulled aside by cautious parents. The whispers always arrived before the carriage itself. Some believed the future bride must be terribly unfortunate in appearance. Others imagined someone bitter, proud, or resentful after becoming the subject of endless gossip. Yet whenever the carriage slowed near busy crossroads, those fortunate enough to glimpse Evelyn through the open window found something entirely different. They saw a young woman sitting quietly with a book resting in her lap, occasionally smiling warmly at strangers or offering a grateful nod to travelers who respectfully moved aside. There was nothing dramatic about her presence. There was only calm. Hundreds of miles away, Blackthorn Citadel awakened beneath crisp northern air as preparations continued without pause. Royal attendants polished marble floors until they reflected towering stained glass windows. Gardeners carefully trimmed white lilies lining the entrance courtyard. Tailors carried freshly finished ceremonial garments through endless hallways while cooks prepared enough food to welcome noble families arriving from every allied territory. The approaching marriage had become the only subject anyone wished to discuss. Some servants quietly hoped the rumors were false. Others wondered whether the king would simply endure an unhappy marriage for the sake of peace. Inside the royal council chamber, King Cale Ashford listened as Lord Cedric reviewed the arrival schedule with careful precision. The royal carriage should reach the eastern gate shortly after noon tomorrow, Your Majesty. Cale nodded once before signing another stack of state documents. His attention never lingered on the marriage itself. Every hour brought new reports concerning border trade, winter grain reserves, and agreements between neighboring pacts. Responsibility remained his constant companion. Yet even while focusing upon matters of the kingdom, fragments of the endless rumors occasionally returned to his thoughts. He found himself wondering why complete strangers had spoken so confidently about someone they had never truly known. It was an unusual question for a man who rarely entertained idle speculation. By late afternoon the carriage carrying Evelyn entered the towering pine forests marking the northern border. Sunlight filtered gently through ancient branches, painting shifting patterns across the road ahead. The peaceful silence allowed Evelyn to close her book and simply admire the wilderness stretching endlessly around her. She had no way of knowing that every mile carried her closer to a life neither she nor the king fully understood. Back at Blackthorn Citadel, the castle watchman climbed the highest tower before raising a polished brass telescope toward the distant eastern road. After several quiet moments, he lowered it with growing certainty before signaling the guards below. Far beyond the forest, barely visible against the fading afternoon light, the royal carriage had finally appeared on the horizon, carrying not only the future queen of the northern kingdom, but the truth that would soon challenge every lie an entire kingdom had chosen to believe. The sound of the castle horns rolled across Blackthorn Citadel just after noon, echoing through ancient stone walls and sweeping over the crowded courtyard below. Every conversation stopped. Noble families turned toward the eastern gate. Royal guards straightened their posture while servants quietly stepped aside, leaving a clear path through the center of the courtyard. The long-awaited carriage had finally arrived. King Cale Ashford stood at the top of the broad marble staircase leading into the great hall, his black ceremonial cloak shifting gently in the cool northern breeze. Beside him, Lord Cedric maintained the calm composure expected of the king's closest advisor, although even he noticed the unusual tension spreading through the gathered crowd. The rumors had lived in everyone's imagination for weeks, and now the moment had come to discover whether those stories carried even a fragment of truth. The elegant black carriage rolled to a graceful stop before the entrance. The horses lowered their heads as the coachman climbed down and opened the polished door without speaking. For one brief heartbeat, the entire courtyard seemed to hold its breath. A slender gloved hand appeared first, resting lightly against the carriage door. Then Evelyn Hart stepped into the afternoon sunlight. Silence followed. Not the uncomfortable silence born from disappointment, nor the excited silence that greeted extraordinary beauty. It was something far more powerful. Every expectation simply disappeared. Evelyn wore the same ivory gown beneath her charcoal traveling cloak, free of extravagant jewels or elaborate decorations. Her appearance was graceful without seeking attention, elegant without displaying wealth, and refined without demanding admiration. More striking than anything she wore was the quiet confidence in the way she carried herself. Her posture remained naturally poised. Her expression reflected calm kindness instead of uncertainty. Her pale blue eyes gently observed the unfamiliar castle before respectfully lowering toward the king. One by one, the whispers vanished. The noblewomen who had expected someone pitiful exchanged uncertain glances. Several merchants quietly frowned as though trying to understand how every rumor could have failed so completely. Even the servants standing near the entrance looked at one another with growing confusion. None of them saw the woman they had imagined. They saw someone whose dignity made every careless story feel suddenly small. King Cale remained perfectly still, yet for the first time in many years, he found himself searching for words that refused to arrive. He had prepared a formal greeting during the previous evening, expecting little more than another political obligation. Instead, he stood before a woman whose calm presence unsettled every assumption he had unconsciously accepted. Evelyn slowly approached the foot of the marble staircase before offering a graceful curtsy worthy of the oldest royal traditions. "Your Majesty," she said softly, her voice steady and sincere, "thank you for receiving me into your kingdom." Cale met her eyes for a brief moment before answering. "Lady Evelyn Hart, welcome to Blackthorn Citadel. I hope this castle will become a place where you are treated with the respect every honored guest deserves." The words sounded formal, yet Lord Cedric noticed something unusual. The king had abandoned the carefully rehearsed greeting prepared the night before. Those words had come entirely from the moment itself. As Evelyn rose gracefully to her feet, sunlight streamed through the towering castle entrance, surrounding the courtyard with warm golden light. Somewhere among the gathered nobles, Lady Beatrice Holloway quietly narrowed her eyes. She recognized the danger immediately. Rumors could survive against strangers, but they rarely survived against reality. And standing only a few feet from the Alpha King, Evelyn Hart had already begun destroying weeks of carefully cultivated prejudice without arguing, without defending herself, and without speaking another single word. Morning settled gently over Blackthorn Citadel, and for the first time since her arrival, Evelyn Hart stepped beyond the royal guest chambers to explore the castle that would soon become her home. The towering halls echoed with quiet footsteps as servants hurried between their morning duties, each one lowering their head respectfully when she passed. Although many still carried memories of the rumors they had believed, none could reconcile those stories with the woman now walking among them. Evelyn greeted every person with the same warm smile, thanking a young maid for showing her the way to the eastern garden and offering kind words to an elderly steward who apologized for the unfamiliar layout of the castle. She never behaved as though kindness were something to be noticed. To her, it was simply the proper way to treat another person. Beyond the stone corridors, the royal garden stretched across several acres beneath the clear northern sky, where rows of white lilies, blue lavender, and carefully trimmed hedges surrounded quiet fountains that had served generations of kings and queens. Evelyn wandered slowly along the winding paths, stopping to admire flowers still sparkling with morning dew. She knelt beside a broken blossom that had fallen during the previous night's strong wind and gently placed it back into the soft soil instead of leaving it behind. Nearby, two young gardeners watched in silence before exchanging puzzled smiles. They had expected someone who demanded attention, yet the future queen seemed more interested in caring for a single flower than displaying her own importance. From the balcony overlooking the gardens, King Cale Ashford reviewed reports with Lord Cedric until a movement below caught his attention. Without saying a word, he looked toward Evelyn as she paused beside one of the gardeners, listening patiently while the nervous young man explained that the fountain had stopped flowing after the recent storms. Rather than offering instructions, Evelyn thanked him for his hard work and expressed confidence that he would restore it soon. The gardener's anxious expression softened almost immediately. After she continued walking, Lord Cedric quietly observed, "She speaks to servants exactly as she speaks to nobles." Cale remained silent for a moment before replying, "That is uncommon." His eyes followed Evelyn a little longer than he intended before returning to the reports waiting on the stone table. Throughout the afternoon, similar moments unfolded across the castle. She complimented the palace cooks after tasting a simple meal instead of requesting extravagant dishes. She thanked the guard stationed at the western gate for standing through the cold northern wind. She stopped to admire tapestries woven decades before she was born, asking the elderly caretaker about the artisans who had created them. Every conversation left people feeling seen rather than overlooked. Slowly, the atmosphere inside Blackthorn Citadel began to change. Servants who had entered the day with uncertainty ended it speaking quietly about her kindness. Even some nobles admitted, although only in private, that the woman before them was nothing like the stories they had repeated so confidently. Yet not everyone welcomed this growing admiration. From the upper gallery overlooking the main courtyard, Lady Beatrice Holloway watched each interaction with growing frustration. Every smile Evelyn earned weakened the false image that had once served her interests. Rumors had opened the castle doors with prejudice, but genuine character was quietly closing them one encounter at a time. As the evening bells echoed across the ancient towers and the last rays of sunlight painted the stone walls in soft shades of gold, King Cale found himself thinking less about the marriage treaty that had brought Evelyn to Blackthorn Citadel and more about the woman herself. For the first time since signing the royal decree, curiosity had begun replacing obligation, and neither of them yet realized that the smallest acts of kindness often carried the greatest power to change a human heart. The following morning arrived wrapped in cool northern air as Blackthorn Citadel slowly awakened beneath a sky painted with soft silver clouds. Evelyn Hart had already become familiar with the rhythm of the castle, choosing to begin each day long before the busiest hours filled the corridors. Rather than remaining inside the luxurious guest chambers prepared for her, she preferred walking through the quiet gardens where the scent of fresh pine mixed with blooming lilies carried gently across the stone paths. As she approached the service courtyard beside the royal kitchens, cheerful voices suddenly gave way to startled gasps. A wooden supply cart carrying baskets of freshly harvested apples had struck an uneven section of cobblestone, causing several crates to tumble onto the ground. Bright red apples rolled in every direction while two young servants froze in complete embarrassment. One of them immediately knelt, apologizing repeatedly as though expecting harsh criticism for such an ordinary accident. Before anyone else could react, Evelyn quietly stepped forward. Without the slightest hesitation, she bent down and began gathering the scattered fruit with careful hands. Her elegant sleeves brushed against the stone walkway as she placed each apple gently back into the baskets, inspecting them one by one to make sure none had been damaged. The young servant stared in disbelief. "My lady, please," one of them said nervously. "You should not be doing this." Evelyn smiled without stopping. "If we all spend time deciding whose responsibility this is, we will finish much later than if we simply help each other." Her calm answer immediately eased the anxious atmosphere. Several nearby workers joined her, and within minutes the courtyard that had moments before been filled with confusion returned to its normal rhythm. Instead of feeling ashamed, the servants found themselves quietly laughing together as they finished reorganizing the supplies. Evelyn thanked each of them before continuing her morning walk as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She never noticed that someone had witnessed the entire moment from the covered stone balcony overlooking the courtyard. King Cale Ashford had stepped outside only to review the progress of repairs along the southern wall, yet his attention had shifted the instant he saw Evelyn kneeling beside the overturned cart. She had not looked around to see who might be watching. She had not attempted to impress anyone. There had been no audience in her mind, only people who needed a helping hand. Cale remained silent long after she disappeared beyond the garden gate. Lord Cedric eventually approached with several documents waiting for the king's approval, only to notice his thoughtful expression. "Something seems to be troubling you, Your Majesty." Cale continued looking toward the empty courtyard before speaking quietly. Every rumor described someone consumed by bitterness. Every day I see someone who carries herself with patience instead. Cedric allowed himself a small smile. Truth often requires more time to arrive than gossip does. Those words remained with Cale throughout the afternoon as he attended council meetings and reviewed reports from neighboring territories. For the first time since the royal decree had been sealed, his thoughts repeatedly returned to Evelyn rather than the treaty itself. The contrast between what he had expected and what he had witnessed continued growing impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Evelyn spent the remainder of the day visiting the castle library, thanking the elderly librarian for preserving generations of history and listening with genuine interest as he shared stories about the kingdom's earliest rulers. Everywhere she went, people found themselves smiling a little more easily after speaking with her. The castle itself seemed warmer, not because its ancient stone walls had changed, but because kindness had quietly begun filling spaces where suspicion once lingered. As evening settled over Blackthorn Citadel and golden light faded behind the distant mountains, King Cale reached a decision that surprised even himself. If every story he had heard about Evelyn had proven false, then perhaps it was time to discover who had created those stories in the first place. That evening, long after the final council meeting had ended and the castle corridors had grown quiet beneath the glow of iron lanterns, King Cale Ashford chose a destination he had not visited in months. Deep beneath Blackthorn Citadel rested the Royal Archives, a vast collection of letters, treaties, family records, and official reports preserved across generations of rulers. Dust floated gently through narrow beams of candlelight as the elderly royal archivist unlocked a heavy oak door and respectfully stepped aside. Without asking unnecessary questions, he understood that the king had come searching for answers rather than history. Cale carried only a single candle as he walked between endless shelves lined with carefully labeled volumes bearing the names of noble families from every corner of the northern kingdom. He stopped before the section marked House Hart and carefully removed several leather-bound records, placing them upon a wide reading table worn smooth by decades of careful hands. The first reports described Lord Hart as an honorable leader respected for fair judgment and generosity toward neighboring villages. Financial records revealed a household known for supporting schools, repairing roads, and providing assistance during harsh winters. Personal letters exchanged between royal officials praised the family's integrity and quiet service to the kingdom. None of it resembled the ambitious, dishonest household described by recent rumors. As the hours passed, Cale continued reading. He found reports from traveling governors who had visited House Hart only 2 years earlier. Each account mentioned Lady Evelyn with remarkable consistency. She was described as thoughtful, well-educated, compassionate toward servants, and admired by local families for volunteering her time at village gatherings. One elderly magistrate had written that although Lady Evelyn rarely attended grand social events, everyone who met her remembered her kindness long after the conversation ended. Cale slowly closed the report, unable to reconcile those words with the cruel image that had spread throughout the kingdom. How did every voice become so wrong, he quietly asked himself. Lord Cedric arrived shortly afterward carrying another stack of correspondence gathered from neighboring territories. Your Majesty, I requested every official document mentioning House Hart during the past 5 years. Cale accepted the letters with growing determination. Together they discovered something unexpected. Nearly every negative accusation about Evelyn traced back to anonymous gossip repeated at noble gatherings rather than verified reports. The stories changed with each retelling, growing more dramatic while becoming less believable. Yet because enough influential voices repeated them, people eventually accepted them as truth without seeking evidence. Cedric studied one unsigned letter before placing it aside. Someone benefited from damaging her reputation before the marriage was announced. Cale nodded thoughtfully. Rumors rarely spread this far without encouragement. Neither man spoke another word for several moments as the silence inside the archive seemed to grow heavier with every document they examined. Above them, Blackthorn Citadel rested peacefully beneath a sky filled with bright northern stars, completely unaware that the foundation of months of deception had already begun to crumble. At that same hour, Evelyn remained in the castle library, returning a history book to its proper shelf after thanking the elderly librarian for his recommendations. She believed the king had spent another evening attending matters of state and never imagined that he was quietly defending her honor without her knowledge. As she looked through the tall windows toward the moonlit gardens, she smiled softly, grateful simply to have found a place where each new day seemed a little kinder than the last. Far below the castle, Cale carefully gathered the final documents before extinguishing his candle. The answers he had uncovered were only the beginning, but one truth had already become impossible to ignore. The woman the kingdom had judged without knowing was proving herself every single day, while those who had shaped the lies were becoming harder to trust with every page he turned. The grand assembly hall shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers as nobles from every allied territory gathered for the formal presentation honoring the future queen of the Northern Kingdom. Rich velvet banners bearing the royal crest hung between towering marble columns while musicians filled the vast chamber with graceful melodies that echoed softly through the hall. Every guest wore their finest ceremonial attire, yet despite the elegance surrounding them, quiet conversations drifted from one corner of the room to another. Some praised Evelyn Hart after witnessing her kindness throughout the castle during the previous days. Others remained uncertain, unwilling to abandon opinions they had repeated for weeks. Standing near the center of the hall, Evelyn greeted each guest with the same quiet dignity that had become her signature. She thanked elderly nobles for traveling such long distances, smiled warmly at young attendants carrying silver trays, and listened with genuine interest whenever someone shared a story about the kingdom. She neither sought attention nor avoided it. She simply treated every person with equal respect. From the elevated royal platform, King Cale Ashford observed the gathering with calm focus. His recent discoveries inside the royal archives remained fresh in his mind, and every passing conversation only strengthened his conviction that truth deserved its rightful place. Across the hall, Lady Beatrice Holloway watched the growing admiration surrounding Evelyn with increasing frustration. She had spent too many years building influence within the royal court to accept seeing another woman earn respect so effortlessly. As the musicians finished their performance and the room settled into expectant silence, Lady Beatrice stepped forward with an elegant smile that concealed careful calculation. "Your Majesty," she said sweetly, "before this celebration continues, perhaps we should remember that a royal crown deserves more than polite manners. A queen should inspire confidence from the moment she enters a room. Rumors do not appear without reason." Several guests exchanged uneasy glances while others quietly lowered their eyes, uncertain how the king would respond. Evelyn remained completely composed. She neither interrupted nor attempted to defend herself. She simply folded her hands before her and waited with the same calm expression she had carried since arriving at Blackthorn Citadel. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire hall. Then King Cale slowly descended the marble steps until he stood beside Evelyn rather than above her. His voice remained steady, carrying effortlessly through the chamber. "I once believed that reputation reflected character. I have since learned that reputation often reflects only the loudest voices." Every eye turned toward the king. He continued without hesitation. "During the past several days, I have watched Lady Evelyn show patience without seeking praise, kindness without expecting reward, and dignity without demanding recognition. I have also reviewed every official record concerning House Hart. Those records speak of honor, generosity, and faithful service to this kingdom. The rumors spoken against her speak only of assumptions repeated until people forgot to ask whether they were true." Lady Beatrice's confident smile slowly disappeared. Cale turned toward the assembled nobles. "A kingdom cannot remain strong if it judges people through gossip instead of truth. Lady Evelyn Hart has earned my respect not because of a marriage treaty, but because her actions have revealed the character that false stories tried to hide." The hall remained silent for only a heartbeat before Lord Cedric respectfully bowed his head. One by one, other nobles followed until the sound of respectful movement spread throughout the chamber like a gentle wave. Many who had once doubted Evelyn now looked at her with genuine admiration. Evelyn herself seemed quietly surprised, her grateful eyes meeting Cale's for a brief moment that required no words. In that single glance, she realized she was no longer standing alone against the weight of countless rumors. The Alpha King himself had chosen to stand beside her, and with that simple decision, the balance of the entire royal court had begun to change. The atmosphere inside the Grand Assembly Hall felt noticeably different after the king's words settled into every corner of the chamber. The uncertainty that had filled the room only moments earlier slowly gave way to quiet respect as conversations faded into thoughtful silence. Noble families who had once measured Evelyn Hart by whispered stories now found themselves remembering the kindness they had personally witnessed during her days inside Blackthorn Citadel. Servants standing along the marble walls exchanged relieved smiles, knowing that the woman who had thanked them by name was finally being seen for who she truly was. King Cale Ashford returned to the royal platform before raising one hand, signaling for the Master of Ceremonies to continue the evening's proceedings. An elderly attendant stepped forward carrying an ornate velvet cushion upon which rested a delicate silver pendant shaped like the royal crest of the Northern Kingdom. Crafted generations earlier, it had long symbolized the trust placed in every future queen. The hall grew completely still as the attendant stopped before the king and respectfully lowered his head. Cale accepted the pendant with careful hands before turning toward Evelyn. She approached slowly, her calm expression unchanged. Despite every eye in the room following her movement. There was no triumph in her smile, no satisfaction toward those who had once doubted her. Instead, she carried the same quiet grace that had defined every step of her journey since leaving House Hart. Standing before her, Cale spoke clearly enough for every guest to hear. When this marriage was arranged, I believed I was fulfilling a duty to protect peace between our families. During these past days, I have discovered something far greater than a political alliance. I have discovered a woman whose character strengthens this kingdom more than titles or appearances ever could. Evelyn lowered her eyes respectfully before answering. Your Majesty, I have never wished for admiration. I only hope to serve this kingdom with honesty and kindness. A gentle smile appeared across Cale's face as he carefully placed the silver pendant around her neck. The polished crest caught the warm light of the chandeliers, reflecting tiny flashes of silver throughout the hall. At that moment, the Master of Ceremonies announced in a proud voice, by the authority of His Majesty King Cale Ashford, Lady Evelyn Hart is hereby recognized as the honored future Queen of the Northern Kingdom. Applause gradually filled the chamber. It began with Lord Cedric, followed by the Royal Council, then the visiting nobles, and finally every servant standing along the walls. What started as polite acknowledgement quickly became genuine celebration. Even those who had once repeated the cruelest rumors now applauded with sincere respect, realizing they had judged a woman they had never taken the time to know. Lady Beatrice Holloway remained silent, her expression carefully controlled as she watched the entire court embrace the very person she had hoped to isolate. Without speaking another word, she quietly stepped away from the gathering, understanding that influence built upon falsehood could not survive once truth stood in full view. Evelyn looked around the magnificent hall, meeting countless smiling faces that no longer reflected suspicion but acceptance. She felt no desire to remember the painful rumors that had followed her to the castle. Those whispers no longer defined her. They had been replaced by something infinitely stronger. Trust had been earned one quiet act at a time, and respect had grown from simple kindness freely given without expecting anything in return. As the royal musicians began another graceful melody and laughter gently returned to the celebration, Cale glanced toward Evelyn once more, realizing that the greatest decision he had made was no longer signing the marriage treaty. It was choosing to see the truth standing before him instead of the stories spoken behind her back. The celebration gradually faded into a peaceful evening as the final guests departed the Grand Assembly Hall and quiet returned to Blackthorn Citadel. Beyond the castle walls, the mountains rested beneath a brilliant sky filled with countless stars, while a gentle breeze carried the fresh scent of pine through the open balconies overlooking the kingdom. Evelyn Hart stepped onto the eastern terrace, grateful for a few moments of silence after a day that had changed her life forever. Her silver pendant rested lightly against her ivory gown, reflecting the soft moonlight with every quiet breath she took. She looked across the endless forest stretching beyond the castle, remembering the long journey that had begun with whispers, uncertainty, and expectations built entirely upon falsehood. It already felt like another lifetime. The sound of measured footsteps approached from behind. King Cale Ashford joined her on the terrace without ceremony, leaving a respectful distance between them as both admired the peaceful landscape before them. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward, as though the castle itself understood that some conversations deserved patience before words. Finally, Cale broke the quiet. "When I signed the marriage decree, I believed I understood everything that mattered." He paused, looking toward the distant mountains before continuing. "I believed duty required me to accept the future exactly as others had described it. I did not question the stories because too many people repeated them. That was my mistake." Evelyn turned toward him with the same gentle expression that had remained unchanged since the day she arrived. "We all see the world through the voices around us," she answered softly. "The important thing is deciding whether we are willing to see beyond them." Cale nodded slowly. "You have shown me that truth deserves more patience than rumors ever receive." He met her eyes with complete sincerity. "For allowing me the opportunity to learn that lesson, and for showing this kingdom kindness even when it had not yet earned yours, you have my gratitude." Evelyn smiled warmly, not because she had been proven right, but because she recognized genuine humility in his words. "Every new beginning asks something difficult from the people who step into it," she said. "I did not come here hoping to change anyone's opinion. I only hope to remain true to the person my family raised me to be." A comfortable silence settled between them once again as they watched the moonlight shimmer across the castle gardens below. In the distance, the repaired fountain now flowed peacefully through the flower beds where Evelyn had spent her first morning, and several castle servants laughed together as they completed the final tasks of the day. Blackthorn Citadel no longer felt like a place divided by suspicion. It had quietly become a home where respect had replaced prejudice, one honest moment at a time. During the weeks that followed, stories about the future queen spread throughout the northern kingdom once again, but this time they carried a very different message. Travelers spoke about her kindness toward strangers. Merchants admired her humility despite royal privilege. Noble families repeated the king's words about judging character through actions instead of gossip. The old rumors slowly disappeared, not because anyone ordered them to stop, but because truth had become impossible to ignore. Standing beneath the endless northern sky, Cale realized that the strongest rulers were not those who never made mistakes, but those willing to correct them with courage and humility. Beside him, Evelyn looked toward the peaceful kingdom they would one day guide together, knowing that trust could never be demanded by a crown. It could only be earned through compassion, honesty, and quiet strength. And beneath the gentle glow of the moon, where an arranged marriage had unexpectedly become the beginning of genuine respect, both of them stepped forward with hope, carrying into the future a simple truth that would outlive every rumor ever spoken, that real dignity is never defined by appearances, but by the kindness a person chooses to offer when the world gives them every reason not to.